On the back of every modern bottle of distilled water sits a small, half-forgotten word. Still. The same still as in Stillroom, a small quiet room that once sat near the housekeeper's parlour in every great country house in England. The room is mostly gone now. The word survived. It moved out of the country house, slipped into chemists' shops, and made its way down the long century into the supermarket aisle, where most people walk past it without ever wondering where the name came from. The label on the bottle, in this small way, is a fossil. It is the last visible trace of a vanished room. Tonight, that is where we are going, a quiet place to fall asleep, and to wake up knowing one small thing you didn't know before. So settle now. Let your shoulders soften. Let the day go, slowly, the way light goes from a window at dusk. There is nothing to carry from here. Tonight you are stepping into the long, slow morning of a country house in the early 1880s. You are not the mistress, not the cook, not the housekeeper. You are the stillroom maid, and the small room you are about to open has been waiting quietly for you since before the first bird. You wake before the household, not because you want to, but because you have to. The sky outside the small attic window is the color of unwashed wool, and somewhere below in the courtyard a single bird has begun, then stopped, then begun again, as if uncertain whether the day has really come yet. You lie still for a moment in the cold. The blanket is heavy, the room is cold above it. There is no clock in your room, but there is one somewhere down through the floors of the house, and you can almost feel it, a slow, steady tick, somewhere beneath your bed, the way you can feel a heartbeat that is not your own. You sit up slowly. The boards are cold under your bare feet. You pull on stockings. You dress in the dim grey light without a candle, because candles are counted, and you have learned in your first few months here that nothing in this house is given that does not have to be given. The buttons of the working bodice fasten down the side, which you have learned to do in the dark. The apron is fresh from yesterday's wash. You tie it, you smooth it, you pin your hair up under the small cap. You move through the small rituals of dressing the way someone says a prayer they no longer think about. Quickly, fluently, by the body more than by the mind. You go down, not by the main stair, never by the main stair, but by the narrow servant stair at the back of the house, which winds round and round like the inside of a shell. You can do it now without a lamp. Your hand knows the wall. The plaster is rough in some places and smooth in others, and you have come to read those small differences with your fingertips, the way you imagine a blind man reads the lettering on a sign. The treads are worn in the middle, dip slightly from 100 years of soles. At each landing, a small window high in the wall lets in the same grey wool of pre-dawn light, and the light shifts a little as you turn. At the bottom you turn left, past the housekeeper's parlour with its closed door, past the dry larder, past the footman's pantry, where the silver lives in its baize-lined drawers, and then you stop in front of a smaller door beside the housekeeper's. You take the brass key from your apron pocket. The key is old and warm to the touch. You unlock the still room. It is your room in a manner of speaking. It is also not your room at all. 100 years ago, this small room was the lady of the house's. Not this lady, not the mistress in the bedroom at the front of the house, who is at this moment still asleep with her hair in a long plait on the pillow, but a lady before her, before her, before her. The lady herself would have stood here at a copper still, in a long muslin morning gown, and distilled her own rose water for her own dressing table. She would have taught her daughters to do the same. The girls would have learned to know the smell of good copper from bad, the colour of properly cut roses, the difference between elderflower that is just past full bloom and elderflower that is 2 days too late. They would have leaned at this same table, in this same room, and written things down in a book, the recipe book on the shelf, the one with the warped covers and the foxed pages, tied shut with a length of soft brown ribbon, was begun by such a lady, in such a room, long before you or anyone you have ever met was born. Some of the entries in it, written in faded brown ink in a hand that slopes the wrong way and uses the long old letter that looks like an F and is meant to be an S, are older than the steam engine. They are older than the railway that brought you here. They are older than the empire that now sends tea up the drive in a cart from the village. A maid in 1880, you among them, opens that book in the morning and follows instructions copied out by a woman who was born under Queen Anne and corrected in the margin by a different woman who was born under George II, and finally, at the bottom of the page, annotated in a firmer, more recent hand by the present housekeeper, who has written simply "Good results, June last." By the time you were born, the lady of the house no longer came here. She rings a bell. You answer it. The still room, which used to be hers, is now considered, in the polite phrasing of the household manuals, the province of the housekeeper or her maid. Mrs. Beeton's great book, which sits in nearly every English kitchen of any size, its name now used as a sort of household authority all by itself, almost a word, already described the still room in a slightly wistful tone when it was published in 1861. Already then it was a half relic. Our grandmothers, the Victorians like to say, used to preside over the still room. They said it about a room they themselves no longer entered, and so the room sits here between 2 centuries, yours to keep but not yours to own. You push the door open. The smell meets you first. Last night's roses are still in the air, faintly, mixed with the cooler note of lavender stalks drying on the rafter. There is the warm, slightly oily smell of beeswax from the polish you made on Tuesday. Underneath, the faint metallic note of the copper alembic, which has been wiped but not yet warmed. The smell is a kind of layer cake of all the work that has happened in here over the last week, and the week before, and the week before that. Some smells never quite leave. The lavender of last June still lives in the rafters, faintly even now. The rose oil that touched the inside of the alembic 3 summers ago, before you came, is somewhere in the metal still. You cannot smell it directly, but when you warm the copper on a quiet morning with nothing in it, the smell of an old summer comes back into the room. The room is small, whitewashed walls, a single high window with little square panes, set deliberately high so that no one can look in from the courtyard, a lead sink, deep and shallow at once, set into a wooden draining board worn smooth by 100 years of elbows, a low confectioner's oven in the wall, lower and steadier than the great range in the kitchen, built for tea cakes and biscuits that the kitchen fire would only scorch, a long scrubbed table down the middle, glass jars in rows along a shelf above it, each with a small paper label tied with string. Lavender last June, rose last June, elderflower this spring. The labels are in the housekeeper's hand. The strings are the same brown twine that the gardener uses for tying climbing peas, because the gardener and the housekeeper have between them a long quiet agreement about the sharing of small useful things. You notice every morning that the still room is not the kitchen. It is not even attached to the kitchen. The kitchen lives on the other side of the basement, loud, hot, with its own brigade of girls clattering about under the cook. You are not one of them. You answer to the housekeeper, who answers only to the mistress. The cook does not give you your orders. This small fact, the geography of who tells you what to do, would tell anyone who understood country houses everything they needed to know about your position. You are below stairs, certainly, but you live in a slightly quieter part of below, a few extra feet of corridor between you and the heat of the range. A separate door, a separate key, a different small kingdom. You go first to the small fire grate at the end of the room. The fire is laid but not lit. You take a match from the tin on the mantel. The match strikes on the rough side and flares a tiny blue. The kindling catches. The little flame is the only color in the room for a while. You sit back on your heels and watch it for a moment longer than is strictly necessary, because the room is yours alone, and no one is here to count your seconds. The fire grows. A small warmth begins to move out from the grate, the smallest possible warmth, the kind you only feel on the back of your hand if you hold the hand close. You hold your hands close, you let them warm, then you stand. You go to the shelf. You take down the recipe book. You untie the brown ribbon very carefully, because the spine is brittle. You open it. You find the page for rose water. You have done this every morning this week. You could do it without the book. You read it anyway. There is something steadying in the same hand on the same page, in knowing that the woman who wrote it is 200 years dead, and yet you and she share, for this small moment, the same small task. A drop of distilled rose, the book says, in its slanted, careful, long-letter way, will keep a year if the bottle be stoppered well. The next line says, the still must be of good copper. The word copper is underlined. There is a small folded piece of paper tucked between two pages further on, near the back, and you have looked at it once and put it back exactly where it was. It is a list, in a hand you do not know, in faded purple ink, perhaps from a fountain pen, perhaps not, of plants. Some you recognize, some you do not. Hyssop, comfrey, tansy, pennyroyal, rue. The list has small ticks against half the names, and small crosses against the rest. The ticks, you think, are for what was grown in this garden, the crosses for what was not. It was, you suppose, a question someone once asked, and made notes of, and then folded into the book for later. The someone has long gone, the notes are still here. You do not know what use you would make of pennyroyal if you grew it, and the present housekeeper has not mentioned it, but the list is still here, in case. You close the book. You set it gently on the table beside you. You look up. The grey at the window has begun to thin. Outside, somewhere across the courtyard, a second bird has joined the first. The kettle on the stovetop is beginning to whisper. The fire in the grate is steady. The copper alembic on its shelf, no longer cold, is faintly catching the first thin edge of daylight, and the metal is the warm orange of a fox in sunlight. Long before the household stirs, the still room is already awake. The roses must be picked before the sun lifts the oil out of them. This is the first rule of the still room in late spring, and you learned it the way you have learned most things here, by being told once, plainly, by the housekeeper, and never told again. She is not a woman who repeats herself. She is also not a woman who explains. The petals, she said on your first morning, must be taken before the sun is properly up. An hour later, and the same petal will give you a thinner water. A day older on the bush, and they are almost lost. The rest you would learn for yourself. She turned away. You learned for yourself. So you take the flat basket from its hook on the wall, and you go out, while the windows of the great house are still all dark, into the walled garden behind the kitchens. The courtyard cobbles are cold under your boots. The gate to the walled garden makes a small protest as you open it. Then you are inside, and the air is different, held, somehow, by the warm brick on all four sides, the way a hand cups a flame against wind. The walled garden is laid out for a workflow, though you doubt the gardener would put it that way. The kitchen herbs grow near the door, parsley, thyme, the chives in their dense green tussocks, the sorrel that the cook uses in spring soups, so that the cook's girl can be in and out in a minute without losing her place at the range. The still-room plants are farther in, along the warm south wall, where the brick holds the day's heat into the night, and the lavender ripens earlier than it would in an open field. The drying herbs, sage, rosemary, mint, the bunches you will hang later from the rafter, are along the same warm wall, because the same wall that ripens lavender also dries it. The roses, the great hedge of them, are at the far end, by the gate that leads to the orchard, where they will be out of the wind. The whole garden is, in a small way, a quiet machine, each plant set in the place where the fewest steps are needed for the work that must be done with it. You did not see this on your first morning, you see it now. You walk down between the gravel paths. Your apron is still cold from the cellar air. The garden is wet with dew. Your boots darken at the toes. Your hem, by the time you reach the roses, is dark too. There is no other person in the garden. The gardener and his boy are at this hour still in the cottages on the far side of the kitchen yard, having their own tea. The garden, for these few minutes, is yours alone. There is a kind of small ownership in this. You are not the mistress of the house, and the walled garden does not belong to you. And a year from now you may be in a different house in a different county, this garden no more than a memory. But for these few minutes, in this small pre-dawn, that no one else from the house has yet entered, the garden is in your care alone. The cool of it, the smell of the wet box hedging that lines the paths, the smell of the dew on the stone, the slight movement of a leaf somewhere in the lavender that may be a wind or maybe a small beetle, the whole quiet sum of the garden, set inside its walls, held by them, breathing slowly the way a sleeping animal breathes, is at this exact hour yours to walk through, and the next thing to happen in it will be a thing you do. You do not, of course, say any of this. You merely carry the basket. You pick standing, working quickly with 2 hands. You do not pluck the whole bloom. You take only the petals, and only the petals that fall easily when you brush your hand across them. The flower itself stays on the bush. There are old, half-remembered reasons for this, and there are practical ones. Petals taken any other way are bruised, and a bruised petal turns the water cloudy. There is also the simple thrift of it. A rose that has lost only its outer petals will still bloom for the dining room vase tomorrow. A rose that has been broken at the stem will not. The garden is a careful place. Everything must be allowed to give twice. The basket fills slowly. You work without speaking, because there is no one to speak to. The bees, somewhere in the lavender, have not yet started for the day. A blackbird begins, low in the cherry tree by the wall. The petals in the basket are cool and slightly damp, and weigh almost nothing. By the time the basket is full, the sky over the wall has turned from grey to the faint colour of pearl, and you know you are at the edge of the hour you were given. You hook the basket on your elbow. You walk back. You are back in the still room while the household is still in its first cup of tea upstairs. You set the basket on the long table. You go to the pump in the scullery passage, and you draw fresh well water into the copper jug, clean water, never the cistern water from the rainwater tank, which smells faintly of the lead pipes and which is good only for washing floors. The well water is colder. It is also slightly sweeter on the tongue, though you would not say so. You carry the jug back. You pour the water into the vat of the alembic. You tip in the petals. You stir them gently with your hand so that they separate and float, suspended like a drift of soft pink in the dim copper. You bring the domed lid down. You clamp it. The room smells, very briefly, of bruised flowers and cold water. Then you light the fire under the still. Not high. The trick of the rose water is the patience of the fire, the long, low simmer that does not boil the petals to mush. You sit on the small stool nearby, and you wait. The room slowly warms. The smell of warming copper begins. After 10 minutes you hear, more than see, the first quiet movement of water inside the vat, a slow knocking against the underside of the dome, the way you can hear a kettle long before it sings. After 20 minutes the worm pipe, the long coiled tube that takes the steam away from the dome and down through a sleeve of cold water, begins to weep faintly. After 25, the first thin trickle from the end of the worm appears, clear, scented, almost weightless on the finger, and drops into the small glass jar you have set under it. Drop, pause, drop. A whole morning here, 4 or 5 hours, sometimes 6, will give you about half the water of the vat as rose water. That is all. The mistress's small crystal decanter on her dressing table represents most of a morning of your life. You do not resent this. It is simply the arithmetic of the room. The water is patient. The fire is patient. You learn, by sitting near both, to be patient too. There is a fact about the still that you do not know, and that the housekeeper does not know, and that no one in this house could explain if asked. The still has to be copper, not tin, not iron, not anything else. The maid, though she was not then called a maid, she may have been the lady herself, who set up this room 2 generations ago, wrote it in the manuscript book, underlined in a firm hand, the still must be of good copper. She did not say why. She perhaps did not know why. The chemistry of it, the way copper itself binds the small sulfur compounds released from heated plant matter and quietly smooths the scent of the water, would not be written down anywhere for many decades after her death. The word sulfur, in that sense, would have meant little to her, and yet she knew, by trial and by inheritance, that the old copper alembic produced a sweeter water than the newer tin one. She wrote it down. You follow it. You are doing chemistry calmly in a quiet room, with no idea that anyone will ever call it that. The instruction in the book is older than the science that would explain it, and you are obeying both at once. The rose drips on. A second hour passes. The kettle on the stove top, set to keep your own tea water warm, whistles softly, and you reach over to slide it back. Somewhere far off in the house above, a bell rings, not yours. You hear the under-housemaid go up the back stair at a brisk step. The bell sound dies away. You go back to watching the jar. When the rose water is done, and you know it is done not by the clock, but by the color of the water in the jar and the dropping back of the smell from the worm, you draw the fire back. You let the copper cool a little before you unclamp it. Then you set the jar aside in a clean stoppered bottle. You will use this bottle many times before it is empty. A little will go into the small cakes for tea this afternoon, into the icing that the housekeeper likes flavored rather than only sweet. A little will go into a glass bowl in the front hall, where when there are guests, they may rinse their fingertips after the carriage road. A little will go up to the master's elderly mother, who uses it for an eye wash for her tired eyes, and finds, as she always says, that it does her good. 1 liquid, 3 rooms of the house, 1 bottle. The economy of the still room is the economy of the small thing put to many small uses. In a week or 2, when the lavender along the south wall has opened properly, you will do the same with lavender. The same petals into water, the same copper, the same patient fire. Lavender water keeps its scent longer than rose, and is used differently. It is sprayed on linen sheets after they come back from the laundry, in the airing cupboard, before they are folded. It is folded among the linens themselves. It is dabbed sparingly on a handkerchief by the mistress for a long carriage journey, against the smell of the road. It is sometimes given, in a glass with a little hot water, to a maid with a headache. The reason given for the linen is the scent. The truer reason, half known and half not, is that lavender oil discourages moths. The little glass bottle with the long neck that the housekeeper will hand you for sprinkling on the freshly pressed sheets is the direct ancestor of the linen spray you can buy in any modern aisle. The same flower, the same purpose, the same trick of water and time. You will be making something which in another century will be sold to people who never knew it had a name like yours. For now the rose drips. You do not need to hurry it. The kettle whistles softly on the stovetop. Somewhere, far off in the house above, another bell rings. Not yours. You stay where you are. The room smells of warm copper and roses, and while the still works on, the rest of the morning is already arriving. By mid-morning, the house has fully woken, and the small geography of the basement, which you are slowly learning by heart, has begun its proper day. The kitchen on the far side of the corridor is at its loudest. You can hear the cook's voice through 2 doors, not the words, only the rise and fall of them, a kind of low weather. The scullery girls are at the deep stone sinks, washing the breakfast china in 2 great basins of hot water, one with soda and one without. The kitchen maids are already preparing the next meal, as if breakfast had not just happened, because in this house a meal is never finished. One is always either coming or going. The bread has been turned out of its tins onto wooden racks. The butter has been brought up from the dairy in its pat. A goose, the cook said yesterday, is being plucked in the back scullery for tomorrow's dinner, and you can faintly hear through the wall the small, soft, rhythmic sound of feathers being pulled. Their day is heat and noise, and the unending question of whether the range is hot enough. You are glad, in a way you would not admit to them, that you are not in the kitchen. Your corridor is quieter. The housekeeper's room is to your right when you stand at your door. The still room is yours. The dry larder with its cool slate shelves is opposite. The footman's pantry, where the silver is polished, is further along. The boundary is unspoken but very real. A scullery maid who appeared in your corridor without a reason would be noticed gently by the housekeeper and would have a reason next time. The footmen come and go, but they come with their hands carrying a tray or a jug, never empty, and they do not linger. The corridor has, in this way, the manners of a small village street. People nod, people pass, people do not stop. At 11 the upper servants take their morning tea. They take it in the housekeeper's parlour, not in the servants' hall where everyone else gathers for meals. This is itself the first thing to understand. The butler is there, and the housekeeper, and sometimes the lady's maid if her mistress is not yet dressing. The cook will come up from the kitchen for 10 minutes if she can be spared, sometimes still wiping her hands on her apron, and she will sit a little stiffly at the edge of the chair, because she does not entirely belong to the upstairs of below stairs. The valet is there if he is in the house. A maid like you does not sit at that tea. You bring the tray, you set it down, you retire. They will help themselves, and they will speak softly of household matters that lower servants are not supposed to overhear. That tea is a small ceremony, and it tells you, if you have eyes for it, that the house has a downstairs upstairs. The hierarchy is replicated in miniature beneath the boards of the great hall. The butler is the master of below. The housekeeper is the mistress of below. The upper servants take their meals attended by the lower. The mirror of the great house is set up in its basement, and the same kind of small courtesies pass over the same kind of small white china. The butler sits at the head of the table. The housekeeper sits at the foot. The cook is to the housekeeper's right. There are rules about who pours and who waits. There are rules about which subject may be raised at which moment. They are not written down. They are very firm. You are reasonably high among the lower. You are not the lowest. The scullery girl who comes in at 5 and is in bed by 10, and whose hands at 15 years old are already red and rough as a charwoman's, has no decisions of her own. You in your still room are trusted with the keys to the spirit cupboard and the recipe book. You decide, within the orders of the housekeeper, the small daily rhythm of your room. You decide when to start the still and when to draw the fire down. You decide which jars to use from the dry larder and in what order. You decide the precise hour at which the small cakes for afternoon tea are taken from the oven. It is the small dignity of the position. It would be invisible to anyone above stairs. It is the whole shape of your day to you. The money, of course, does not match the dignity. A laundry maid in this part of England, in this part of the 80s, earns about £18 a year. The kitchen maids earn around 15 or 16. The scullery maids, the youngest of them, perhaps 13. You earn somewhere in between, closer, you think, to the laundry maid, though you have never seen the housekeeper's book and would not ask. The wage is not the point of the position, because there is hardly anywhere here to spend it. The wage will go almost entirely back to the small village you came from, to a father who keeps a small farm that does not in this difficult agricultural decade quite keep itself. Corn prices are bad. The hard winters before this one have not helped. Your father wrote last month to thank you for the postal order in a sentence that took up half a page because each word had to be considered carefully. He is not used to writing letters. He is used to writing accounts. The annual servant's tea allowance is, you have learned, a separate small fact of life in this house. Each servant is given, by the housekeeper at the beginning of each quarter, a small paper twist of tea leaves and a small paper twist of sugar kept in a tin in the attic. This is for the cup you make in your own room, on your own time, when you have any. The upper servants get a slightly stronger tea than the lower. The housekeeper, by virtue of being the housekeeper, blends her own. You have a small twist of yours in your own tin, still half full, on the chest in your attic room. The fact that this is given without being asked for, every quarter, by a household whose accounts are otherwise watched to the halfpenny, has begun to feel to you like the small unspoken kindness of a house that has, in spite of everything, learned to look after the people in it. What you have in the meantime is board and uniform and tea sugar and a bed and a roof. You eat better here than you did at home. You also have, more days than not, your own one corner of one room. That is more than your sister has, who is in service in the next county over and shares a bed with the under-housemaid. Your sister wrote last week that the under-housemaid snores, that she has learned to fall asleep before the under-housemaid does, that she now considers this her chief accomplishment of the year. The day off is one a month at most, sometimes none if there is a house party. The house party of last March was not a happy memory. You distilled 3 batches of rose water in a single week for the dressing tables of guests you never saw, and you slept 4 hours a night for 9 nights in a row, and the housekeeper, when it was over, gave you a small jar of plum preserve and said in her dry way that you had done as well as could be expected. Let it go for now. Let the day off go too. The tray needs setting. You take down the tin caddy with the housekeeper's preferred tea, a strong one with a small amount of smoke in it that you do not quite like, and weigh out the leaves with the small brass scoop. You set the teapot to warm with a little hot water, which you then tip out into the slop bowl. The biscuits which you made yesterday are in the tin in the cool larder. They are thin almond ones, brushed with rosewater glaze, the kind the housekeeper likes with her tea because they are a little richer than plain shortbread, but not so rich as the cook would make. The cakes you will make this afternoon in your own low oven, because the kitchen range is too fierce for them and would scorch the tops before the middle was cooked. The still room is also, in this way, the tea room below stairs. You are half pharmacist and half pâtissier, with no one quite sure which half is more useful to the house. The cakes for tea, the biscuits for tea, the small jellies for invalids, the cordials for thirsty guests in summer, the barley water for the children, the honey and lemon for the master's winter cold. All of these come out of your low oven and your patient pan, not the cook's. The cook has the dinner. You have everything that is taken with a cup or a spoon, between meals, by anyone in the household who is not eating a proper meal at the proper hour. You carry the tray along the passage. You set it down on the round table in the housekeeper's room. She is at her desk already, in her black dress with a small white collar, going through a list with a fine pencil. The list is the order for the next week's groceries from the town. She is the kind of woman who orders by the half-pound and the quarter-ounce, and would, if asked, be able to tell you the running tally of the household's sugar from memory back 6 months. She nods at you without smiling, but the nod itself is a kind of acknowledgement. You retire, you go back, you close your own door. There is, you have come to feel, a strange small honor in being trusted with the keys. The housekeeper, when she gave them to you at the end of your 2nd month, did so without ceremony. She simply put them into your hand at the door of the dry larder and said in her plain way, "You will need these." She did not say more, but the gesture itself contained a year of small assessments. She had been watching you. She had been watching the way you tied your apron, the way you left the recipe book exactly where you found it on the shelf, the way you did not gossip with the kitchen maids in the corridor, the way you did not open jars that had not been asked for. The keys are not a gift, they are a verdict, and you would not part with them now for anything in the wage book. The still room, in the middle of the day, is the quietest place in the house. The mistress upstairs has gone out in the carriage to call on a neighbor. The master is in his library with the door shut. The kitchen is making the meal but not yet serving it. The fires in the bedrooms have been laid for evening but not yet lit. The under-housemaid is upstairs sweeping the hall carpets with damp tea leaves, the way her grandmother probably taught her. You are alone with rising dough on the marble slab, and the slow tick of the wall clock, and the smell of the morning's rose water still faintly on your hands. You wash them in the lead sink. The clock ticks. You roll out the pastry. The cool of the marble slab eats into your palms in a way you have come to find pleasant on a warm late spring day, when the only other place to put your hands would be in your apron pockets. By the time the bell rings again, the afternoon is already settling. There is a row of small brass bells along the wall of the basement passage, just outside the housekeeper's room, and you have come to know them the way a sailor knows the bells of his own ship. There are about 20 of them. Each is fixed on a coiled spring at the top of a long wooden board, and each has a small painted label below it: drawing room, dining room, library, morning room, master's bedroom, mistress's bedroom, the yellow room, the blue room, the rose room, the nursery, the school room, the hall, the master's dressing room, the mistress's dressing room, the small parlour. The board itself is dark with age, older than the present housekeeper, older than the present butler, older than anyone now living in the house. The bells themselves have been replaced over the years, one at a time, as one or another wore out. But the board is the same board. The labels themselves are not in fact what you read. You learn the bells by sound. Each bell on the board has been made to a slightly different size, with a slightly different tone, so that a maid who is busy elbow-deep in pastry or polishing in another room can tell, without looking, that the call has come from the library and not from the morning room. There is the high silvery one for the drawing room. There is the slightly heavier one for the master's bedroom. There is a small, almost shy one for the small parlour at the end of the corridor, where the mistress sometimes sits alone in the morning with her letters. There is a brighter, brassier one for the dining room, because the dining room calls are sharper and more impatient. There is one, the deepest of all, with a long, low, slightly mournful note for the nursery, and you have learned that this one almost never rings, because the children are small and the nursery has its own girl. And there is a deeper, kindlier one for the still room itself, yours. The whole arrangement is a language of sound, and the house ran on it long before any household in England had a telephone. A bedroom upstairs is connected to its bell by a slender wire that travels through the wall, round a series of small pulleys, over a joist, under a floorboard, behind a wainscot, down the long shaft of a thickness of plaster, and at last into the basement, where it ends in the coil. A gentle pull on the embroidered tassel in the bedroom, and you can almost picture the mistress's hand, half lifted from her writing desk, then settled back to the page, and at the other end of that long hidden journey, a bell jumps on its spring in the passage outside your door. It vibrates for a few seconds. The whole row trembles slightly in sympathy, the way a row of glasses will tremble when one is struck. You glance up, you read the bell, you wipe your hands on the apron, you go. This is in its way a small marvel of communication that no one in the house thinks about any more. The mistress in her bed, the master in his library, the elderly mother of the master in the rose room at the back, can each by the smallest movement of one hand Send a particular sound into a particular distant corner of the basement, where a particular person will hear it, look up, recognize it, and start a journey toward them. The house, in this sense, has nerves. The board of bells is its little brain. In this house, and you have heard the butler mention it at servants' supper, with the air of a man who has lived through a small modern revolution. The bell system was new when the present master's father was young. Before that, in the older country houses, the servants were summoned by clapping, or by leaving the bedroom door open and calling down the stair, or, if the gentlemen were very old-fashioned, by a small handbell on the nightstand that was tinkled until someone heard it through the closed door of the corridor. The sprung wire bell, when it came in early in the century, was thought a small miracle of household management, each room with its own line, each call distinguishable, each maid able to know within 5 seconds which corner of the house wanted her. The butler is fond of saying that no servant alive remembers what it was like before, and that the older butlers, the ones he himself served under as a young man, used to speak of the old days of clapping and shouting with a certain mild horror. And then, only in the last 20 years or so, something newer still has begun to arrive. Some of the larger country houses, not this one, not yet, but 2 over the hill, in the house belonging to the cousin who has, the housekeeper says, more money than sense, have had the electric bell installed, a small electromagnet, a small armature, a small hammer, a battery in a cupboard somewhere, replaced every few months by a man who comes out from the town with a leather satchel of tools, the same pull on the same embroidered tassel, but no long wire winding through the walls of the house, just a circuit, a more reliable, less temperamental thing, in theory. The butler is not entirely sure about it. He has a low opinion of any system that requires a man with a toolkit to come out from the town once a year to keep it in order, and he has a particular suspicion of batteries, which he regards as a kind of bottled mischief. He prefers, he says, things that he can see working, wires he can see, coils he can see, springs he can see. A circuit hidden behind plaster strikes him as not entirely respectable. But here is the small detail that you find yourself thinking about. Sometimes, when you sit on your stool in the quiet still room and look up at the row of bells, when the electric bell was first installed in those other houses, no one tore out the old sprung wire system. The old wires were simply left in the walls, looped, dusty, beautifully useless. To pull them out would have meant taking down half the wainscoting in half the house, and no master in his senses would have done so for the sake of tidiness. So somewhere 2 valleys over, behind the panelling of a perfectly modern drawing room, there is 100 feet of disconnected bell wire that goes nowhere, a small fossil of an earlier system set into the bones of the house. The pulley wheels are still in place. The little hooks in the joists are still in place. The whole quiet skeleton of a sound that no one will ever ring again is still there, in the dark, behind a wall that looks, from the lit side, perfectly fresh and perfectly modern. The new replaces the old in the visible parts. The old is left in the walls, the way old roads are left under new ones, the way old foundations are left under cathedrals. There is another thing about the bells that you have noticed but not yet found anyone to mention it to. The board itself, with its row of brass, is set just outside the housekeeper's room, not inside the kitchen, not inside the servants' hall. The bells are, in the geography of the basement, the housekeeper's bells. She does not always answer them herself, of course. The summons that comes from the drawing room is for the under housemaid. The summons from the dining room is for the footman, and so on. But it is the housekeeper who hears them all from her open door, and who can tell by a glance at the rhythm of the ringing whether the house is settled or unsettled, whether the mistress is in a temper or merely in a thought, whether the master is well or unwell. The bells in this way are not just a system of summoning, they are a kind of weather report. The housekeeper listens to them the way an old farmer listens to the wind. The still-room bell rings now, not for you, the drawing room, the high silvery note. You hear it without looking. The under-housemaid, somewhere along the corridor, will be on her way up. There is one bell that has not rung in your time here, and you have noticed it because the dust on its small brass dome is slightly thicker than on the others. It is the bell labelled simply, the schoolroom. The children, the master's two small girls, do not have a governess at present. The previous one left a few months before you came, and the new one has not yet been engaged. The bell waits. The wire behind the wall waits. The small embroidered tassel in an unused upstairs room hangs unmoved against the wallpaper. When the new governess comes, at Michaelmas the housekeeper says, possibly, that bell will begin to ring again, and you will, in your first hearing, glance at it without recognizing the sound. The board has a memory of its own. You go on with what you were doing. The afternoon is the time for putting up small things, a jar of red currant jelly to top the row of last summer's. The fruit is brought to you in a bowl by the gardener's boy, who leaves it on the step without knocking, because he has been told not to enter the still-room. The still-room door is the unspoken boundary of his territory. He sets the bowl down. You hear his boots on the gravel as he goes back to the garden. You take the red currants in. They are jewel-bright, almost translucent, slightly sticky between the fingers. You strip them from their stems with your fingers, the small pink berries breaking against your thumb, the juice running into the palm of your hand. You set them to cook in a copper preserving pan that has been in this room, according to the housekeeper, for nearly 50 years. The bottom of the pan is bright where you have scoured it. The sides are dark with the patient stain of 100 summers' worth of fruit. The red currant jelly will be poured out into small glass jars, sealed with discs of paper soaked in brandy. This is the housekeeper's preference. It keeps the mold out and labelled in the housekeeper's hand. The label will say the month and the year. The jar will go up onto the shelf in the locked press in the housekeeper's room, somewhere between last year's red currant and the year before's. It will be opened in November for a pudding, or in February for a sick child of a tenant family, or perhaps not at all. Some jars sit on those shelves for 2 or 3 years without being touched, because the household tradition is to use the oldest first, but to have at least 3 years of red currant in case the bushes fail in some season. The store cupboard is, in its way, a kind of insurance, made of glass and sugar. The jelly settles. The bell rings again briefly somewhere along the row, not the stillroom note. You don't look up. The light slants now through the high window at a thicker, more amber angle. The day, the way days do, has begun to lean forward. Behind the row of bells, another quieter system has been running all along. Late afternoon is the time you most often slip outside. You take the flat basket again, and this time you take the small curved knife the gardener keeps for you on its hook by the door, and you go back into the walled garden. The sun has moved round to the south wall now, and the warmth there is gathering, the way the heat in a brick wall always gathers by late afternoon. The bricks are old, the colour of old roses themselves, soft red gone slightly orange where the sun touches them. You can feel the warmth at your back even before you reach the south side. The lavender along the south wall is opening, perhaps 2 stalks in 5, the rest still tight, the buds still showing as small grey-green knots. You take the open ones. You cut low, just above the leaves, the way you have been shown. The cut stems weep a small bead of clear sap. The smell on your hands afterwards will not go away until you have washed twice in well water. The garden was laid out, you have come to understand, in a particular order. Not the order a flower garden would have been laid out. Flowers placed for beauty, for the eye looking out from the drawing-room windows, but in the order a workflow would dictate. Kitchen herbs at the door, where the cook's girls can run in and run out without losing a minute. Stillroom flowers farther in, by the south wall, where they ripen earlier. Drying herbs in the same warm strip, so that the bunches you carry indoors at evening have already had the sun on them for hours, and need less time on the rafter to come right for the tin. Roses farthest of all by the orchard gate, on a hedge so old that nobody now remembers who planted it. The hedge was here, the housekeeper says, when she came as a young lady's maid 40 years ago. It is here still. It will probably outlive everyone now in the house, and the next generation, and the one after that, because rose hedges have their own measure of time. The whole walled garden is, in a quiet way, an instrument of the house's small economy. Nothing here is wasted on a path that leads nowhere. Each plant grows in the place that minimizes one of your steps. Even the gravel paths are wide enough for 2 baskets to pass, but no wider, because a wider path would lose growing ground for no real gain. You did not see this at first. You see it now, behind the still-room wall, in the small sunny strip between the kitchen garden and the orchard fence, are the bees. There are 6 wooden hives in a row, white painted, slightly faded by the weather, set up on low brick stands above the wet grass. The bees go past your shoulder in the warm air with that calm, dragged-on, low humming sound that lifts and falls like the breath of someone asleep. You stand for a moment near the hives without moving, because moving suddenly is what brings bees to your face, and they have, over the months, come to ignore you in this corner of the garden. You are simply, for them, another tall, slow shape that smells faintly of beeswax already. You are not the beekeeper. The beekeeper is the gardener himself, who comes down with a wisp of smoking straw on the days when the hives must be opened, and who has been stung enough times in his life that he barely notices a fresh one. But you are connected to the bees in a particular small way. The wax from those hives, clean, pale, blocked and rendered down by the gardener, and brought to you in a wooden trug at the end of each summer, is what you melt in your own copper pan with turpentine and a small amount of linseed oil to make the furniture polish that goes upstairs every Friday for the housemaid to rub into the long mahogany table in the dining room. The honey from the same hives is what goes into your cordials in autumn, and into the simple cough medicines you prepare in winter, and into the marzipan-like sweets the housekeeper sometimes makes for the children of visiting cousins. Room, table. The chain is short and clear. You have a basket and a hive and a copper pan and a small glass dish and a child's mouth, and they are all part of the same 6 steps of an estate that produces, season by season, almost everything it needs. It is not a fully self-sufficient estate. Few are by the 1880s. Tea comes from across the world. Sugar comes by railway from a port. The flour for the household bread is now milled by steam in a town 12 miles off, not by the old stone watermill on the brook, which fell out of use 10 years ago and is now half overgrown with elder and dog rose. Coal comes by cart from the railway sidings. Even the linen, when it wears out, is replaced from a town draper, not from a village weaver as it would have been in the master's grandfather's day. But the small luxuries of the table, the rose-scented cake, the lavender-laid sheet, the red currant jelly, the honey water with a little ginger for the master when he has a chill, the elderflower cordial that comes out for guests on summer evenings, these still come from inside the brick walls. They are not bought, they are made. The making of them is, in a manner of speaking, why you are here. The dairy door is open across the courtyard as you carry the lavender back toward the house. You see, from where you stand, the dairymaid moving slowly in the cool half-dark, with a wide wooden bowl in her arms. The dairy is a different world from yours, cooler, white-tiled now, in the modern fashion that came in 20 years ago when the old slate floor was replaced. A different set of smells, milkier and earthier and faintly metallic from the small zinc-topped cooling tables. The dairymaid and you do not work together much. Your lives in the household are parallel and almost untouching, like 2 narrow streams running side by side in the same field. She is older than you by a few years. She has been here longer. Her hands are red from the cold water of the dairy, and she has the particular slow, steady walk of someone who carries heavy things gently. You nod across the courtyard. She nods back. Neither of you speaks. There is nothing in particular to say. The light is beginning to soften. Past the dairy, in the corner of the courtyard you can see, if you lean slightly, is the laundry. The laundry door is closed. The laundry's day, like the kitchen's, is already past its peak. The big coppers, the literal coppers, the great riveted vessels in which the sheets are boiled, were drained an hour ago. The drying yard beyond is full of the day's last washing, white sheets and white pillowcases moving very slightly in the small evening air, the way a flock of small calm birds might move. By morning the sheets will be down, folded, ready for the housekeeper's hand, and your small muslin bag of lavender ready for the airing cupboard. You think briefly of the chain of rooms that one sheet travels through, the laundry, the drying yard, the airing cupboard, the linen press with your lavender, the upstairs bedroom, the mistress's bed for a week. back to the laundry, around again. The sheet is a small object that crosses in its year almost every working room of the basement. You are one of the rooms it passes through. There is by the orchard gate a small low bench made of 2 stones and a weathered plank, set there by the old gardener, the present gardener's father, who is now buried in the village churchyard, for the use of anyone who wanted to sit for a moment at this end of the garden. You sit on it sometimes, when no one is looking, just for a minute, with the basket on your knee. You do not sit on it now. The light is going. The dairymaid has gone in. The basket is heavy enough already. In the orchard, beyond the wall, the early apples are still small and hard on the branch. The blossom is just past. The first windfalls of summer have not yet begun. You can see through the open gate the long grass between the trees, the scattered daisies, the bramble starting along the lower edge, the way a low hair moves in the corner of the eye and is gone. The orchard does not really belong to the working part of the estate at this hour. The gardener is somewhere else. The grass is uncut. The sun lies on the trees the way it might lie on a painting of an orchard hung above a parlour mantel. There is a sense, standing here for a moment with the basket of lavender on your hip and the warm bricks at your back, of being inside a small and well-ordered system in the middle of a much larger one, the house and its rooms, the walled garden and its 4 quarters, the orchard and the fields beyond it, the little river 1/2 mile off that you cannot see from here but that you can sometimes hear on a still night, the parish set inside the county, set inside the country, set inside an empire whose maps you have only seen on the schoolroom wall when you were a child, with the parts coloured pink that the schoolmaster said belonged to the Queen, and all of those circles, just for now, sitting still around you, while the bees come and go behind you and the lavender slowly weighs your basket. Before you turn back, you stand for a moment longer at the gate, the basket in the bend of your arm, the bees behind you, the orchard beyond. The sun has begun to slant. The shadows of the apple trees lie long across the grass. You think of how, in the autumn, you will be in this same orchard with a different basket, the wide picking basket, the one with the wider mouth, gathering the windfalls for the cellar. You think of how, in the deep winter, you will be in the still room at 3 in the afternoon, with the lamp already lit, making honey and ginger cordial for the master's cold. You think of how, in February, you will be making lemon curd from the lemons that come up in their straw crate from London on the railway, and how, in March, you will be making barley water for the children. The year set out in this small way is a kind of circular calendar with you at the center of it, the same hands doing slightly different things on slightly different days, and the same house around all of it, breathing slowly and quietly. You turn back. You go in through the courtyard door. You climb the 2 stone steps. You set the basket on the long table. The smell of lavender now indoors fills the room, fuller than it was outside because the room is enclosed and the warm bricks of the south wall are not there to absorb it. The copper alembic on its shelf seems to lean very slightly toward the basket. The fire in the grate has burned down to a soft orange bed, and so as the sun begins to lower, the house begins to fold inward. By the time the lavender is in the press and the red currant jelly is set in its jars, the light through the high stillroom window has thickened to a slow gold, and you can hear through the door the soft beginnings of the evening above. The upstairs is dressing for dinner. You do not see this. You feel it. The lady's maid has gone up at a quicker step than usual. You heard her on the stair, the small precise tap of her shoes that you would now recognize anywhere in the house. The valet has crossed the corridor twice, once with a pressed coat over his arm, once without. Somewhere overhead a hot water can is being carried into a bedroom, and somewhere else a hairbrush is being lifted from a dressing table and set down again. The whole house begins to angle itself by small motions towards a single point, the moment in an hour or so when the gong will sound and the family and any guests will walk through into the dining room. Below stairs, the rhythm is the inverse. The kitchen is at its peak. The undercook is plating the second course's accompaniments. The footmen are folding the napkins on the side table in the dining room. The butler is in his pantry, polishing one last decanter with a soft yellow cloth, watching the lamplight slide along the cut glass. You are quiet. You have done your part of the day. Your work was never the loud work. You move along the row of presses in the housekeeper's room. The housekeeper is in the dining room overseeing the silver. She has left you the keys. On the small silver chain she usually keeps at her waist, for the small chore of taking down 2 jars, one of red currant for the duck, one of plum for the pudding. The presses have glass doors and proper locks. The shelves inside are lined with paper. The jars are arranged in rows the way books on a shelf are arranged, except that the spines you read are dates. Red currant jelly, June 3 years ago. Red currant jelly, June 2 years ago. Red currant jelly, June last year. And the row you have just begun this afternoon, still warm somewhere on the cool slate of the dry larder, waiting to be brought through tomorrow morning when the wax discs have fully set. Strawberry preserve, blackberry preserve, damson cheese, quince marmalade, lemon curd, mincy meat in November, pickled walnuts, pickled onions, spiced pears, each row a season, each shelf a year. The household tradition, the housekeeper told you when you first came, is to keep 3 years of each. Use the oldest first, replace from the youngest, so that if the bushes fail in some year, or the season is wrong, or the gardener falls ill in the picking month, there is always something in the press. It is a small thing when you see it stated like that, but it is also a quiet act of survival, set up by a woman 2 housekeepers ago, and continued without comment by every housekeeper since. The house keeps 3 years of jam against any future for which 1 year of jam would not be enough. The house, on its own quiet shelves, holds a small surplus against the world. Each jar is a postcard from an earlier season. The jar of strawberry preserve at the back has July of 3 years ago in it, in the form of fruit picked on a hot Wednesday by a girl who is no longer in this house, in a kitchen garden whose lavender beds have since been replanted on a slightly different line. The jar of pickled walnuts. They look strange and beautiful in the dim light, like small dark planets in their brine, was begun on a green walnut tree that does not even grow at this end of the orchard anymore, The tree blew down in a storm the autumn after you came, and the housekeeper has not yet decided what to plant in its place. The mincemeat from last November still holds, faint behind its paper seal, the smell of brandy and the small dark spice the cook bought in the town in October. To open a jar from these shelves is, in a small way, to taste a piece of time. You will not say this to anyone. You do not have the words, but you feel it briefly every time you turn the key in the press. Time stored on a shelf, each year folded into glass. There's, you have come to feel, a particular kind of dignity in those jars that has nothing to do with whether they are ever opened. They are there as a promise, the promise that the bushes were healthy this year, the promise that the cook was paid, the promise that the gardener still has hands enough to gather at the right hour, the promise that the housekeeper has a maid she can trust to put up a jar of jelly that will set firm and keep clear, and not turn cloudy in the press, and not grow mold under its disc of brandy paper. Each jar is a small line of trust between 3 or 4 people. The line of trust holds. The shelf all summer and autumn fills. You take the 2 jars you have been asked for. You lock the press again with the small careful motion the housekeeper made you practice on your first week. You leave the keys, as you have been told, in the small wooden bowl on the housekeeper's desk. Never on the desk itself, never in the apron pocket, only in the bowl. You go back along the corridor. The gas lamps in the basement passage are being lit now. There is a small soft pop as each one comes on, a fine yellow blooming in the glass, and the corridor, which has been dim with afternoon, is suddenly warmer and longer. The bells along the wall catch the light in their brass curves and seem to lift very slightly out of the dark wood of the board, as if waking. The corridor going lit in stages, first the unlit length, then bay by bay as the under-housemaid moves along with her long taper, the small flame at the end of it travelling at almost the pace of a walking person, is one of the small ceremonies of evening that the house repeats without thinking every day of its long life, since the gas was put in 2 decades ago. You pass the door of the servants' hall and hear them inside. The door is half open. There is the low murmur of voices, the scrape of a chair on stone, the small clink of crockery being set down. The underfootman is laughing about something he has been told upstairs, a turn of phrase the master used at dinner perhaps, that the footman is now repeating with his own slight emphasis. The kitchen maid laughs back. The scullery maid is shy and quiet in the corner with her bread and tea, listening but not joining in. She is the youngest of all of them. She came up from a village in the next county at 13, and has not yet learned that she is allowed in the servants' hall after supper to speak. She listens. She will in a year begin to. They will eat their supper at a long scrubbed table, while the family is having soup 4 floors above. You will eat yours later, after the upper servants' meal in the housekeeper's room, with the housekeeper and the cook and the butler. You eat better than the lower servants do. You eat the same dishes as the family in slightly smaller portions, often, although you will not see the soup tureen come back down with the carefully scraped bottom that means it was a successful one. You will hear about it. The butler will mention it without seeming to. The housekeeper will nod. There is a small economy of pride in those nods that took you several months to read. For the moment, you go back to your own door. The still room is dim. The fire has burned low in the grate, to a bed of soft glowing ash with one dark log not yet burned through. The copper alembic is wiped and put away on its shelf for the night. The long table has been scrubbed, and the wood is darker where it is still slightly damp. The jars are in their rows. The cake tin from this afternoon's tea, now nearly empty, sits where you left it. You stand for a moment by the door, looking at the room without entering, and you have a small, unaccountable affection for it, the way one has, you suppose, for any space one has worked in long enough to think of as one's own. The room itself does not, of course, belong to you. You belong to it in a way. That is the deeper truth of service, which you would not have been able to say in words a year ago. You step in, the room receives you without ceremony, the way it always does, the way an old coat receives a familiar shape. You close the door softly behind you. You unwrap a small clean cloth from the basket on the table and take out the last task of the day, the half-finished bag of dried lavender flowers from last summer, to be rubbed between the palms to break up the small stems, then tied in small twists of muslin with a length of ribbon and sent up to the housekeeper for the linen presses. The work is light. The smell, as the dry flowers break, is enormous in the small room. The lavender of last June is suddenly very present. The warm south wall on a different summer in a different year. The way smells fold time. You work slowly at the long table. The lamp throws your hands into a soft, warm yellow against the dark of the wood. You think of nothing in particular. The small muslin bags fill one by one with the dried purple-grey flowers. You tie each bag with a small length of pale ribbon, knot it twice, set it on the tray beside you. The tray will go up to the housekeeper in the morning. The bags will go into the linen press in the upstairs cupboard. The bags will, in their turn, do their small slow work all summer, keeping moths from the white sheets and the long linen tablecloths, until the sheets themselves are taken out in some week of August or September, smelling of last June's wool by then, and slept under by someone who will not, at the moment of lying down, think where the smell came from. The smell will travel on the sheets from this room and this small table and the warmth of your fingers all the way to a guest bedroom on the second floor, where it will be breathed in by a sleeping body that has not yet arrived in this house. Smell as a small inheritance. Smell as a way of being in two places at once. The room is calm, and the evening settles, as evenings always do here, after the family's dinner is well underway upstairs, and the footmen have stopped their last quick journeys to and from the kitchen. A kind of softer hour begins below. You take your own supper in the housekeeper's room with the cook and the butler and the housekeeper. The meal is plain and good. The cook has sent down a small portion of what is going up to the family, plated with the same care as if it were going to the dining room. A thin pale soup, a slice of duck with the red currant beside it, a small wedge of cheese, a glass of beer for the butler and weak tea for the rest. The housekeeper has approved it without much comment, which from her counts as praise. Conversation is sparse. The butler reads a small piece of news from a folded paper, a notice of a horse fair next month in the town, which interests no one but is read aloud because there must be something. The cook complains very mildly about the temperature of the range. The housekeeper says nothing of importance. You eat slowly. You are tired in a way you did not feel an hour ago, the way the day's small efforts catch up at the moment one sits down. The room is warm. The lamp on the table is steady. The cook's apron is, you notice, just slightly singed at the front edge from leaning against the range too closely. Nobody mentions it. She will mention it herself later. The clock on the housekeeper's mantel ticks. It is older than any of you in the room, and it will go on ticking after any of you have left this house. And somewhere in this thought is a small quiet comfort. The fire in the small grate is low but kept. The room smells faintly of the wax polish on the dark sideboard, and of the housekeeper's tea, and of bread, and very faintly, behind all of these, of the lavender from your apron sleeve. You eat slowly. You eat with the small, careful manners that the housekeeper insists on. Knife held lightly, fork held lightly, no elbow on the table. The manners themselves in this house are a quiet kind of education. You did not have them when you came. You have them now. Then you rise. You carry your plate through to the scullery without being asked. The scullery girls have already gone up to their attics, and there is only one girl on latest duty who washes for the upper servants, and you return to your own room because there is one last small task left for the day. The still room is quieter now than it has been all day. The window is dark. A single oil lamp burns on the long table, its yellow circle reaching about as far as the edge of the wood and no further. The copper alembic is on its shelf, dim against the wall, almost the color of the shadow itself. The lavender stalks you brought in this afternoon are tied in small loose bunches and hung from the rafter, where they will dry for a week or so before being taken down and rubbed into a tin. The smell in the room has shifted with the day. This morning it was the warm distilling sweetness of rose. Now it is the cooler, drier note of lavender mixed with the faint smoke of the lamp and the slow last warmth of the embers in the grate. You sit down at the table with a cup of tea. You do not often allow yourself this, but the day is almost over, and the housekeeper is in her own room with her own cup and her own book, and no one will come. The cup is the one with the small chip on the rim that you turn away from your lip when you drink. You hold it in both hands. The warmth comes through the china into your palms slowly, the way the warmth of a bird does when you have caught one and not yet let it go. You let your eyes rest on the row of bells through the open door. They are silent. Their brass catches the lamp from your side and is very faintly lit, just enough to make out the curve of each one against the dark of the wooden board. In an hour, perhaps, one will ring, and it will be the mistress wanting her lady's maid, and the lady's maid will come down the stair, and you will hear her in the corridor, but not now. Now the bells hang on their springs and do not move. The house above and around you is for these few minutes still. The drawing room above will have emptied. The mistress will be in the small parlour with her book. The master will be in the library with his brandy. The children, somewhere up on the nursery floor, will already be asleep. You turn the cup in your hands. You think, without meaning to, of the manuscript book on the shelf. You think of the woman who wrote the page for Rosewater 2 centuries ago. You wonder whether she sat as you are sitting now, late, with the day behind her and a cup of something warm, and looked round her still room and felt the small ownership of a space which was not hers. You wonder whether she also knew that she did not know why the copper mattered, knew in the way one knows things by hand and not by reason, and made her peace with that, and wrote it down for whoever came after. You wonder whether she would have wanted you to know that the small bottle of rosewater you finished this morning will be carried up to a dressing table by the under-housemaid in the morning, used by the mistress in 3 places before evening, used by the housekeeper to flavour a small cake, used by the master's mother as an eye-wash, and not thought of again by any of them. Probably she would have wanted you to know it. Probably the writing down was itself a small message. I did this thing, and someone will come after me and do it too, and that is enough. You think also more lightly of the row of bells out in the corridor. You think of how many small different motions in different rooms of the house, in different decades of its long life, set those particular brasses ringing in their particular tones. The high silvery one, the small lifted hand at a writing desk, the deeper one of the master's bedroom, the pull of an elderly arm out of the heavy bedclothes when a small grandchild has crept in too early, the shy one of the small parlour, the mistress sitting in the morning sun, having decided finally that yes, she would like another cup of tea. Each bell is, in a manner of speaking, a record of 100 years of small wants and small permissions. The wires that connect each bell to its tassel are the long, thin nerves of a body that has been wanting things gently and politely for generations. The oil lamp gutters once and steadies. You look back at it. Outside the window the night is properly down. You can no longer see the glass houses or the line of the wall. There is only the soft black of the country at night, and the room here very small and very lit, and the smell of lavender from the rafter, and the slow tick of the clock through the wall from the housekeeper's room. There is a particular quality to the quiet of a country house basement at this hour that you have not felt anywhere else in your life. At home, in the village, the quiet of the night was an outdoor quiet. The wind in the hedge, a dog 2 cottages down, the slight creak of the cottage timbers. Here the quiet is indoor. It is held by walls. It is the quiet of a building that has been built thick and built well, and that absorbs sound the way a deep cellar absorbs the small noises of the street above. You can hear in this quiet smaller things, the faint settle of a coal in the dying grate, the faint movement of the lavender bunches on the rafter when the air shifts, your own breathing which has slowed. A bell rings, briefly, somewhere along the row, the high silvery one, the drawing room. The bell trembles for 2 beats and is still. The lady's maid is already on her way. You can hear her in the corridor, soft footfall going past your door without slowing. The bell goes still again. The under-housemaid will go up later with the warming pan for the master's bed, and the warming pan, an old brass one with a long oak handle, lives just inside her cupboard down the corridor, and will be filled with hot coals from the range. You take a slow sip. You think, with a small inward smile, of the housekeeper's tea, strong, faintly smoked, set down with her book at her own table at this same hour. You think of the master upstairs in his library, his small glass of brandy on the table beside him, the lamp warm on the open book, the dog on the rug. You think of the mistress in her parlour, the small thin teacup, the letter half folded. You think of the children asleep 2 floors above, the night light in the corner of the nursery, the nanny in her own small room next door. You think for a moment of how every part of the house at this exact hour has its own small cup or glass or candle, its own small ritual of settling. The house drinks itself to sleep in small different ways on each of its floors. You drink your own. You set the cup down. The lamp warms a small circle of the table. The lavender on the rafter is faint and steady. The clock in the housekeeper's room ticks. The bells along the wall do not move. The world in this small 10 minutes asks nothing of you. You take the teacup to the sink. You rinse it under the small tap, because you have left a little hot water in the kettle for this last task. You set the cup upside down on the wooden draining board, the way the housekeeper prefers. You wipe your hands on the apron. You stand for a moment longer at the door of the still room, looking back into the dim, warm space. The fire has gone fully out. Only the deep glow of the last ash. The jars are in their rows. The copper alembic, in the shadow on its shelf, is only an outline. The lavender bunches on the rafter move very slightly in the small air the door makes when you stand near it. You will be here again before dawn. The room knows it. You know it. You take the lamp from the table. You step into the corridor. The corridor is mostly dark now. The gas lamps turn to their lowest, throwing only a soft blue suggestion of light on the bells along the wall. You close the still room door softly behind you. The brass key turns. You hear the small click of the bolt. And then, at last, the day begins to close. You go up by the narrow back stair. The lamp in your hand throws a moving circle of light on the wall as you turn each corner. You climb slowly. Your legs feel the day now. They feel the morning standing at the still, and the afternoons standing at the table, and the late afternoons walking in the garden, and they feel all of those very politely in the small heaviness with which the knees take each step. The treads are familiar under your shoes. You count them without meaning to. 12, a small landing, 12 more, another landing, 12 more. The smell of the rest of the house, the wax of the banisters, the faint cooking smell drifting up the well from the basement, the cold air higher up where the heat of the day has not climbed, comes and goes as you climb. The lamp circle moves with you. The rest of the stair, ahead and behind, is dark. At the top of the stair, the corridor is plain and bare. The attic is not papered. The walls are lime-washed. The ceiling slopes. The single high window at the far end of the corridor lets in only a faint paler patch of the night. There is a moon somewhere, low and partial, but not enough to throw a real shadow. The corridor itself is mostly the color of the lamp circle in your hand. The doors along the corridor are small and identical. Plain pine painted a soft cream that has gone yellow over the years, and behind each one is a small room with a narrow iron bed. The kitchen maids are at this end, the housemaids are at the other. The undercook has a slightly larger room at the very end with a fireplace that does not in winter actually warm her. You are between. The doors are mostly closed. A faint sound of breathing comes from one of them as you pass. One of the younger girls is already asleep, the way only the very tired can be asleep at this hour. From another door faint, the small soft sound of pages turning, one of the housemaids reading in bed by a stub of candle she has saved for this purpose, which is not strictly allowed, and which everyone, the housekeeper included, pretends not to know about. You walk slowly. You do not want to wake anyone. The boards under the rough strip of corridor matting are old, and they speak in small creaks if you put your weight on them too quickly. You have learned which ones to avoid. The second from the schoolroom girl's door, the one just outside your own door, which has, you suspect, a knot of pine under the matting that gives a particular high creak. You step over it now without thinking. The way one steps over a stream in a familiar field, you open your own door. The hinge complains very softly, the way it always does, and you have stopped months ago trying to oil it, because oil up here is asked for and counted and not given easily. The room is small. The bed is along the wall under the slope. There is a washstand with a tin jug and a tin basin. There is a small chest with 3 drawers, on top of which a candlestick, a comb, a hairbrush, a small framed picture of your mother, and a folded white handkerchief. There is a single high dormer window, and through it, when you lean, the dark fields drop away towards the river, half a mile off. There is no curtain. The window does not need one. Nothing out there can see in. The lavender bunches you tied in your apron pocket this afternoon, you forgot they were there until now, give a small soft scent into the room as you take the apron off and fold it. You set the apron on the chest. You unhook the bodice of the working dress. You pour a little water from the jug into the basin. You wash your hands and face. The water is cold. The cold is good in this small enclosed room in late spring. You dry on the rough towel that hangs on the nail by the washstand. You unpin your hair. The day's work begins to leave you very slowly in small unstitching motions. Pin out, pin out, pin out. The hair, when it falls, is heavier than you remember it being this morning. You sit on the edge of the bed for a moment, with the candle still lit. You think of the still room below you, somewhere down through the 3 floors, and the back stair, and the long corridor. You think of the copper alembic on its shelf, cooling, the fire in the grate, fully out, the jars in their rows, the lavender on the rafter, the smell of rose, which will be gone by morning, and the smell of lavender, which will not. You think of the brown ribbon round the manuscript book, tied in the small bow you tied it in this morning. You think of the row of bells in the basement passage, silent now. They hang motionless on their springs. They will hang motionless until well past midnight, and then perhaps one will ring very late, if the master cannot sleep and wants water, and the lady's maid or the under-housemaid will go down to him by the same back stair you have just climbed, or perhaps no bell will ring at all until dawn. The house on a good night can be very quiet. You think of the manuscript book, the page for rosewater, the brown ink, the slant of the old hand, the woman 200 years ago who underlined the words good copper. You wonder, briefly and warmly, what room she slept in, and whether her bed was as small as yours, and whether she ever sat on the edge of it the way you are sitting on the edge of yours, with the day folded behind her, and the night ahead of her, and the smell of lavender on her sleeve. You let the thought go. You let the day go. You think of the way the morning will arrive, the grey at the dormer window, the single bird in the courtyard, the cold boards under your bare feet again, the buttons of the working bodice fastening in the dark, the narrow stare down, the brass key warm in your apron pocket, the unlocking of the small door beside the housekeeper's, the first push of the door, the smell of last night's lavender on the rafter, which will still be there in the morning, faint but present, the way smells are faint but present after a night, the fire to be laid in the grate, the match, the small blue flare, the copper alembic on its shelf, catching the first edge of daylight in the colour of a fox in sunlight, all of it waiting. But not now. Now you only have to do this. Lie down, pull up the sheet, close your eyes, breathe. You blow out the candle. The room goes dark. The window is a paler dark in the wall. The sheets, when you lie down, are cool. There is the small clean smell of lavender on the pillow. The housekeeper's linen press is good. The house is large. You are small. The corridor is long. Below, in the dark, the still room is closed. The copper is cool. The bells are still. The clock somewhere in the hall strikes the hour. You feel it more than hear it. Breathe slowly. There is nothing to keep. There is nothing now to hold. The lavender, the pillow, the dark, the slow weight of the bedclothes, the faint pulse of your own warm breath against the inside of your wrist where it rests near your cheek. The house breathes too, in and out, slow, like a body asleep. The morning will come in its own time. The bells will ring in their own time. The copper will warm again. The petals will be picked. The day will repeat itself in its small, careful, unremarked way, the way it has done in this house since before you were born, the way it is done in country houses across the country, on this same kind of late spring night, for longer than anyone can quite remember. You think of the other small attic rooms along the corridor, each with a girl in it, each girl breathing slowly into the same dark. The kitchen maids, their hands still smelling faintly of soda and flour even after washing. The housemaids, their fingers still slightly stained with the polish they put up to the silver frames on the upstairs mantel earlier. The under-housemaid who walks the corridors with the long taper, who is younger than you, who has not yet learned to fall asleep at once, but lies for a while with her eyes open, looking at the slant of the ceiling. She is somewhere along the corridor now, finally still. You can almost feel her stillness through the wall. You think, more dimly, of the larger rooms downstairs, several floors below, the mistress in her white bed, with the embroidered linen the housekeeper had pressed and folded with lavender from your own bag of last summer's flowers, the master in his dressing room beyond, the elderly mother of the master in the rose room at the back, her small bottle of rose water on her bedside table, the eye wash she will use again in the morning, the same eye wash you carried up the back stair yesterday, the children in the nursery floor, the small breathing of small lungs, a stuffed bear fallen between two pillows, the whole long body of the house, asleep in its rooms. The house holds all of you. The walls are thick, the roof is tight, the doors are closed. Outside, the country is dark for miles. The river runs on in the valley, low this time of year, almost silent. An owl, somewhere over the orchard, has called once and not called again. The hares in the long grass have settled. The bees in their hives behind the stillroom wall are clustered around the queen for warmth. Slow now, their many wings folded. Everything that was working today has stopped working. The copper is cool. The fire is out. The bells are silent. The jars are closed. The book is shut. The hedge is dark. The lavender stands on its rafter, just as it was when you left. Nothing is asked of you for the next few hours. Nothing. Let that be enough, but not yet. Not yet. For now, only this. The small clean smell of lavender on the pillow, the cool sheet under your hand, the dark of the sloping ceiling above, the faint paler square of the dormer window, the soft far-off settle of a beam in the roof, the small breathing of the girl in the next room, faint through the wall. You let your eyes close. You let the day go down through your shoulders. You let your hands rest, palm up, on the cool sheet. You let the dim outline of the room, even the outline, slip. The house quiets. The corridor is still. The stair is still. The basement is still. The still room is still. The row of bells does not move. The copper is cool. The rose is gone. The lavender stays. And you are nearly there. And so the still room is closed, and the copper is cool, and the row of bells along the basement passage is silent. The lavender along the south wall of the walled garden has folded itself in for the night. The roses are quiet. The bees are in the hives. The fire in the grate is fully out. The fruits put up this afternoon are settling in their jars on the cool slate of the dry larder, where they will wait in the dark for the housekeeper's hand to lift them tomorrow morning and carry them through to the locked press. The manuscript book of recipes is on its shelf, closed, the brown ink resting in its long pages. The page for rosewater is closed inside it. The hand that first wrote it is 200 years quiet, and the hand that read it this morning is up in the attic above, slow and warm under the bedclothes. They are not so far apart, those two hands, when the house is asleep. They have, in the end, done the same small things in the same small room, by the same small light, with the same small pan of copper and the same small basket of petals. The house breathes around them, in and out. Slow, the corridors are dim. The bells along the wall do not move on their springs. The drawing room is dark. The dining room is dark. The library is dark. The mistress's bedroom is dark. The little parlour at the end of the corridor where the mistress sometimes sits alone in the morning with her letters is dark too. Everything that was busy a few hours ago is now still. Let your shoulders settle. Let the long-held things of the day go down, one by one, until there is only the small weight of the body and the small warmth of the sheet. The day was made of small motions, a basket, a copper, a jar, a bell, a row of dried stems, each of them done and put away, and not needed again until morning. The house holds them all for you, on its shelves, in its presses, in its silent passage. There is nothing more for you to keep. Think of the smell of lavender on the pillow, not as a thought, only as a faint presence. Think of the slow ticking clock in the corridor, somewhere far below. Think of the dark fields outside the dormer window. Think of nothing in particular. The house is large. You are small. The corridor is long. The night is wide and unhurried. Let your breath slow. Let your jaw soften. Let your hands grow heavy. Let the small map of the basement, the corridor, the row of bells, the housekeeper's door, the still-room door, drift gently out of focus, the way a candle's circle goes when the candle is put out. There is nothing more to hold. The still-room is closed. The copper is cool. The bells are still. Close your eyes. Let your breath slow. Let the day go. Let the lavender be. Let the room be. Nothing pulls you forward. There is only this. Soft sheet, soft pillow, soft dark. The house sleeps. The house sleeps. You sleep. Sleep well.